Shalom, welcome to a new interview from Philosophia Judia. We have Rabbi Ariel Groisman with us. Many of you may know him. I can tell you that he has many years of experience. I dare say almost as many years as I have been in this world in the subject we are going to discuss now, which is what should be the dynamic between non-Jews and Jews. But should non-Jews join Jewish communities or could they form their own communities? Those non-Jews who follow, let's say, the ways and patterns of thought of Judaism, we call them Bnei Noach, in Spanish, Noahides. They are essentially people who are monotheists among the non-Jews. And I want to start precisely with that question, which also briefly, Rabbi Groisman, who is a rabbi at the Paso Temple, has also been a rabbi in several places and various locations throughout Latin America. But practically on this subject, I think he is the greatest expert on this continent, in Latin America. And now, first of all, welcome, thank you for being here, and I'll go straight to the question. How do you start? Is it good for them to start meeting in person or to knock on the door of a synagogue? What should the group do if they already know each other and know there is a group of Noahides with the potential to do something? How do you begin?
Shalom, Yaakov, thanks for the interview. Yes, of course. Actually, before the synagogues, there were houses of study and Noahide interaction, the first study center and Noahide gathering of monotheists. It was the son of Noach, Shem, who built in Tzfat in the north of Israel, the first house of studies, together with his great-grandson Eber. It stood for over 400 years, educating all the patriarchs, matriarchs, and prophets of that era. That is to say, people who are not Jewish do not need to knock on the doors of synagogues, especially in Jewish institutions. Mainly because there are practices for Jews there, and the practices for non-Jews are different. It's like a man knocking on the door of a women's gym. If the gyms are for women, the man has nothing to do there and should visit a men's gym. So the goal is, first of all, to see what is the correct way to develop a community. A study group, a mutual aid group, a civil association of non-Jewish people under the law of the Torah being monotheists. Without this being similar, the framework of a religion or church, but also not the Hebraised dynamic of a synagogue, of an institution, of a classic Jewish Bet Knesset. This was the first thing that in the year 2004, my own rabbi, Rabbi Joseph Festo, may he live to 120, chief rabbi of the Chabad community of Argentina, told me, you have to achieve in the Noahide activity that the Noahides have their own prayer centers and their own institutions for study and dynamics. A space of their own and not attached to what is the Jewish community, especially when Jewish communities, especially in Spanish-speaking countries, are not prepared to absorb, nor do they have a specific message for them. So it's like a disconnection.
But then, what system should they take? And I ask you this because I have heard the opinion, for example, of people who are also very involved in the subject. They have analyzed it a lot. For example, Irving Gattel. He told me that if people come, for example, from the church system, it makes sense for them to use the tools of a system they already know, which is the church. That is, what would happen here, Rabbi? Where could they get these tools from? Because if you say they shouldn't take the model that Judaism has, should they take the model they come from, or the tools, or how does it work?
Good point, but I disagree with my friend Ibrin. Actually, nothing from the church, in substance or form, is useful for developing rational monotheistic communities, since it goes against many of the very foundations of monotheism, which are dissent, diversity, let's say, and the danger that a new religion might develop from there, which is a mistake and a Noahide prohibition, as well as certain patterns and sectarian behavior. The worst thing that can happen to a person who leaves those centers of idolatry or religions of paganism and idolatry, is to replicate that same system and the interaction between people. So if we don't give a clear definition from the beginning, knowing that the monotheism of the Torah is absolutely different, we'll make a mistake because people categorize based on what they know, assuming it's like a Hebraised church or something similar. So that's why we give a practical rule of thumb, which is when you have doubts about how to act, ask a pastor and a missionary and do the opposite. That's exactly how you get the formula. Why? Because in those places, it's completely distorted compared to the monotheism of the Torah. In other words, whatever a pastor or missionary suggests, you have to do the opposite. Absolutely, you can perfectly take examples from different models of civil society, civil associations, mutual aid groups. For example, study centers, and cultural and activist centers. At the end of the day, what are we talking about here? We're talking about people who come together for a specific determined purpose and under that label. They can also eventually register in official records to be recognized by the state and so on as non-profit associations or similar organizations. There are several. Over the course of the 2 decades we've dedicated to Noahide outreach, we've collected different patterns to help and guide people who have very good intentions but don't know how to do it, of organizing their own Noahide community or their own study group in their country or city. And about this, if you want, we can talk a little more and develop the topic.
Yes, we'll get to that. I'd also like to emphasize this to the audience. Recently, a date was celebrated, commemorated, which is very important for the Chabad movement, which is one of the most influential Hasidic groups in the world. And for those who don't know, Chabad is a movement that you can go to any corner of the world and you will very likely find Chabad there. That is to say, if there is someone who, in my opinion, knows how to build communities, knows how to create, let's say, stable platforms, it's Chabad. So the advice that Raf Groisman is giving you, Raf Groisman is very close to Chabad. So believe me, the words you're hearing are not in vain. And now, Raf, after making that note, I would like to proceed and have you give these kinds of practical guidelines and, let's say, a structured approach, as you know well how to teach us.
Of course, words often hide and deceive, because the same word community for someone who lives in Jewish communities means one thing, and for someone who never knew them, it means something else. So maybe they associate the word community with what they knew in their group of hydraulic hobbyists, which is something completely different, and they have to think of it as a club of shared interests, and that's how it should be developed. The first thing that someone who wants to develop to be a leader or director of a Noahide community has to do is to be a conscious and practicing Noahide, that is, to be active in the groups. Existing ones that have a track record and have lasted over time, which are generally supervised and guided by expert rabbis like the different Spanish-speaking groups in Latin America and in other countries as well. Absolutely. Study the fundamentals of the faith from the beginning. What does the Noahide law mean? Which is not just a basic declaration, but what is behind it. A lot of practice, study, and prayer about it together, and learning a bit from how others reflect it. What about the Noahide groups? What do they do? Mainly identify affinities by location, basically within the same countries and cities. Start connecting the people who are active in those groups, who visit websites and attend in-person groups, and create a virtual group at first. We recommend starting virtually instead of in person due to safety and other concerns. Open a WhatsApp group, a Facebook group, an Instagram group to bring together people interested in receiving specific Noahide content, not Torah content, which there is a lot of and it's very good, but specifically Noahide content. From pages like Philosophia Judia, others, noagidas.org, Britolab, and others that are more specialized in the Noahide topic. And start bringing people together based on their affinities and the content. Where interested people will come together and each one will take on a role. One prepares a lecture or prepares a story to tell. One takes on. The interactions start to develop, at first all virtual. After there is a critical mass. Dozens or even hundreds of people from the same country or even from the same city who have that in common and can eventually later on meet in person. It's important for everyone to come together through Zoom or any virtual platform and start to formulate their own declaration of principles. What does that mean? That they define themselves, define who we are not, and what we are here to do in the group. Who we are, who we're not, and our purpose in the group. What for? So that anyone new who joins can come in, orient themselves, and adapt to who we are not, what we can expect from the group, and what we cannot expect. Because many people have a lot of spiritual and emotional needs and they think the group can solve all their problems, just like they were used to in religions. Here there is something very specific. So it will be the group's ability to determine, I'll just give an example, but the idea is that each group can do it based on their values, principles, traditions, and the countries they come from. For example, we are a group that studies and spreads the monotheistic spirituality of the Torah according to the sages of Israel and the Noahide covenant. That's who we are. But what we are not is a religious group, a political group, or a group linked to any kind of ideology, whatever it may be. Debates and discussions about religion, politics, or other ideologies have no place here. It's important that they are not allowed. Any interaction unrelated to the topic we're discussing should not be allowed to distract us, because when the space is too open and the person leading doesn't have experience with group dynamics, the group will become disoriented and go in all directions. So, acquiring some tools can be done through general knowledge or by following the guidance of a specific rabbi to define oneself. What is it? There's more, but I wanted your feedback so far.
I really appreciate as your tone shows that you push back against the common criticism, which you mentioned, that a new sect or religion is being formed. Exactly everything you're saying is the key to not creating a sect and not making a religion. You're giving all the guidelines. Something else I'd like to mention is that this isn't just theoretical. In fact, yesterday as we're recording this video and when this video comes out, but there was the gathering organized by Osher Shalom, where people, Noahide groups, and rabbinical leaders met. In fact, Rav Groisman was one of the main speakers at this gathering, and the leaders and groups were all Noahide, each from their respective countries. So these plans that Rav Groisman is talking about are not for some distant future. These things are happening now and will continue in the coming years. The question is who will take part and who won't. That's why I'm telling you. I will leave in the description the way you can contact Rav Groisman on his page. Also his social media so that you can know how else you can take part in this historic process in a practical way, in my opinion. Well, Rav, if you want to continue.
Of course, the large number of communities that are developing is very real, but the main thing is that it should be lasting and successful over time, that it fulfills its self-defined objectives set by the person themselves. The community is not the leader or the rabbi who can give advice, but the people themselves. The people themselves define what they want from that group and what the objectives are, so that those who join the core of the community and those who join later follow that line and achieve those objectives. And to develop groups for children, groups for couples, in-person meetings, outings, social action, all of that the community itself will define, and also define what we are not and what the group cannot expect. For example, health issues should be referred to health professionals. Psychological issues should be referred to mental health professionals. Work issues should be handled between the people involved. In the group, we come to do something very specific. So the person who joins for the first time will receive this statement in the first few minutes about who we are not, what we come to do, and what we do not come to do. Right away, they realize that what they're joining is a completely different group that they've never experienced before, that they didn't know in their previous spiritual journey, let's say in their past. The group is there to develop the spirituality of the Torah according to the Noahide laws, and that's what is being discussed. Obviously, it's something very broad and has many aspects, including a practical aspect as well. And at the Noahide Fair and in other annual events held by different groups, all the Noahide communities interact with each other. Whether it's organized by Brit Shalom, or when we promote it from noagidas.org, or by Osho Shalom, it's very clear that there are many people from different countries and with different backgrounds, but they all have similar guidelines and directives. This is what we say, that the Noahide path is unity in diversity. Unity in diversity, the same principles, but each with their own style and practice. Let's continue a bit with the development. Once we're already in the virtual groups on WhatsApp, on Instagram, there are enough hundreds of people from the same place, from the same city, who start to interact. Each one takes part and each one can contribute. Those who don't know how to look for specific content and don't know how to consult with someone, don't know how to share, can help raise funds to help. There will be a treasurer who will be supervised by the whole group and will collect funds for some activity. For example, paying for web hosting or advertising or something similar. The financial aspect of a group is also important in order to develop and carry out activities. It's important for participants to rotate and not cling to each role. Rotate through their roles. They should learn different roles and dynamics. One person can be the treasurer, another can be the one who calls someone weekly, another can be the one who downloads the video and posts it on YouTube. Each person should start taking on different roles. And the group is formed in virtual environments so that when the transition to in-person happens, there is already a dynamic and everyone knows their role. And that transition should be as natural and smooth as possible. So the group is formed virtually at first and then moves to in-person. But when they meet in person, everyone already knows each other from before, from months ago. They know the objectives, they've reached a consensus. So it's like a smooth landing into in-person meetings. because we all experienced it, the transition from the virtual environments during the pandemic, family, personal, work environments to in-person. So for that landing to be as smooth and as organized as possible, it makes sense to do it this way. And also to take the successful examples from the role models, leaders, and guides of other Noahide groups, or from rabbis or expert teachers on the subject who are there to give advice. You really don't have to reinvent the wheel or think that you're alone. Rather, there are a lot of successful and long-lasting groups. We're talking about decades and years. There are certified Noahide leaders who already have decades of experience in teaching and organizing Noahide groups, just like expert rabbis. So direct them to those people for help and guidance. And the leader, director, or teacher, it's important that at the beginning he says, we are learning together. I can make mistakes. If we make mistakes, we can correct them. We're sharing a community experience. No one holds the revealed truth. And this also applies to those former pastors or similar leaders who had groups idolatrous and transitioning to a monotheistic world. That is something very important. We help these people a lot so that the transition to the monotheistic world under Maimonides' principles is carried out correctly. It's perfectly valid for someone who already has an established group, recognizes that it is wrong because it is tied to paganism and idolatry, and wants to embrace monotheism without losing that group to make the transition. There is a transition that has very specific details according to each group, but it does exist. And that is very appropriate, very valid.
In fact, I would like, based on that last point you mentioned, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel again. The knowledge is already there. You, Raf, are not saying it off the cuff, but that's why I tell people. Go to Raf Groisman and ask him what we should do in practice. I like the approach you have. Now that I'm considering it, now that you mention it, I used to see it as just jumping straight into an in-person community. Now that you say it, it makes a lot of sense that Hashem provided us with these technologies in this generation to do it in a certain way. I mean, to do it intelligently and not just recklessly. So there's also an interesting point, and this is where I wanted to make that point. You say there are many expert rabbis. What do you think, once the Noahide community starts to take shape, could be the synergy or the contact with the local Jewish community? Would there be any dialogue? Would there be any bridge? Or are they independent from each other? There can definitely be dialogue,
interaction, and joint activities. But the Noahide community, the study group, needs to be very well organized. I'm sure they are. They are developed and organized. That's actually how we do it and encourage it. We create the contact, the bridge between the Jewish communities and the Noahide communities, but they have to come already organized. That is, we're talking about a group of 20 or 30 people who interact for an hour and a half per week in virtual environments and then in person. For example, ready to collecting food, medicine, first aid kits, or clothing to help local groups. That group already formed, which takes months or years to put together, it's not something that happens in weeks, interacts with the local community for a specific purpose. They can even take kingdom services that as a group someone can teach or guide them in if they know about it, if they're an expert, or eventually use multi-purpose halls in the same community. Be careful. But for that to happen, several things need to take place. It's not like one or two people knock on the door of the Jewish community because they won't open it. There's no interaction. When they are organized and go through all these steps we mentioned, it's very likely that yes, the local Jewish community will open up and interact. Noahides shouldn't perform Jewish prayers or visit synagogues, even if they want to, as it doesn't make sense for them. Yes, for activities that have a common good and a common purpose. For example, everything related to social action and volunteering to benefit specific local aid centers, hospitals, schools, health centers. The same goes for educational activities, in line with what the Noahide Code recommends, first aid activities, traffic awareness, law compliance awareness, all kinds of counseling. All these are shared responsibilities that the Noahide has to fulfill because of the precept of Nidim, collective organization, laws of justice, and the Noahide community often wants to do it as well, but lacks structure, organization, and people to carry it out. This could create a great and interesting synergy. Also, there are certain Jewish practices that do have a universal character, like the festival of Hanukkah, something in Rosh Hashanah, and other things as well, that they can also interact in those aspects of the Jewish community where the message is universal. In Argentina and Buenos Aires, that's how we do it in various synagogues where we're active, which is great. Once it's well developed, analyzed, established, and there's an entity, interacting with the local Jewish community becomes much easier.
Great, Raf. I'm going to leave the audience with that thought. You already know, if you have any questions, reach out to Raf Groisman. I like that this was another video we made. There was a video that also reached a lot of people, which is about how to recognize if someone is in a cult, if they've become cult-like. And this one is kind of like the restoration, the tikkun, because if someone manages to leave the cult, now what? And this is like the path of what to do next. So, Raf, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for being a light for so many people who are going to watch us in this video. May we build that bridge and make the world better as our prophets envisioned.
Amen, amen, so be it. And without a doubt, the awakening of the Noahide movement is one of the messages of the prophets before the era of the Mashiach, the era of universal redemption, which we are so close to, as Isaiah and Jeremiah clearly state. So we must take advantage of all this energy, all this inspiration that we see in the world, to guide and channel it in pleasant, correct, practical ways that lead to a good outcome.